Paul Hobbs Winery is one of the top, most respected that there is throughout the world. So there it is, 1991. Take it back a notch, actually, to your trip to South America,
Correct.
Your exposure to Argentina,
Yes.
and to what's going on down there. Tell me how that changed your life.
Well, what happened is I actually had gone down to see Chile and ended up meeting Nicolas Catena's brother, Jorge, who I had gone to school with. When I got to Argentina, what I had thought I was going to see, I didn't see. I thought what I had been told and had imagined was that Argentina was going to be a country that didn't have a possibility of making great wine. But when we drove over the Andes, and when we entered the country, I saw small vines similar to I would expect to see in Bordeaux, for example, with small clusters. This was harvest time in Mendoza, Argentina, right up against the Andes. And then I met Nicolas Catena. Well, actually, before meeting Nicolas, I tasted some wines, and they were almost, for the most part, oxidized. Mm-hmm. So these were spoiled wines, and Nicolas was very anxious to make great wine. And so that's what really changed my life. And so working with him, being very entrepreneurial, and wanting to change the whole flavor of a country down the road that they were on, is something that intrigued me greatly.
Well, how'd you do that?
From the very beginning, we started in the vineyard with the fundamentals of restructuring the way the vines are trained up the trellis. We changed the way the vines are irrigated and fertilized and so on. Most of what they were already doing was good, but we had to make some significant and dramatic changes, and that took 3 or 4 years in the vineyard to accomplish. And then again, when we got to the winery, that's where the most work had to be done, because Argentina had been essentially built out in the 1930s, but then it had been isolated, had closed down importation of equipment and so on. So their equipment was 50 to 60 years old, antiquated, defunct, and terrible.
So what was the difference between the equipment back in the 30s and modern-day equipment? In a nutshell, how different is it?
Radical. Totally different. I mean, they were using machines that would destroy the fruit, and so the wines tasted like leather, and they lost all their fruit. Today's equipment is much more gentle, far more sophisticated. And so that was one of the things that we had to do, was to introduce new equipment. But that actually came later. We started making the first great wine in a very fundamental and basic way, which was difficult for me because I had been used to having all the toys, stainless steel tanks and beautiful pumps. And
this was back to nature a little bit.
This was back to nature.
Did you change the type of grapes? Did you change? What did you do about that?
Well, they had already, being a country, a high population of Italian and Spanish immigrants, they'd already planted Italian and Spanish varieties, but not many French varietals like Cabernet Sauvignon or Chardonnay, for example. So we did, in fact, have to plant. Of course, 15 years ago when we were doing that, we were among the first. But today, there's a wide planting of those varietals.
You say when you came over, it reminded you of Bordeaux. Is that because of the topography, because of the soil? What exactly?
The soils, primarily, because they're very stony and gravelly. Certainly the climate is different. It's continental. And that's where my greatest fear was, in fact, whether we could make it work. And Nicolas wanted me to make Chardonnay, a white wine rather than a red wine, which, if there was any hope to being successful, common wisdom held that it would have to be red. But he wanted to even go against that and go to the extreme.
Why would that be more difficult? Why is white more difficult in that situation?
Requires more technology. There's more need for temperature control, stainless steel, more precision in a way to make whites, and the careful avoidance of oxidation.
You know what you're doing here? First of all, you're making me thirsty. Secondly, everybody out there who in their mind is thinking, I'm going to buy some land somewhere, and I'm going to do this because this sounds like a great way to live. You're right now hitting them with a dose of reality. It's not as easy as people think, is it? I mean, you can make wine, but you can't make great wine that easily.
Yes, it's very, very difficult to do it correctly. And that was one of the major challenges, especially to do without machinery. It seems like a lot of folks go into the business thinking, well, if I can throw enough money at it and stay with it, because it's a very capital-intensive industry, if they can do that, they're going to come out. But then comes the problems. There's all kinds of pitfalls because it's agriculture, partly. So getting the grapes right is the first challenge. And then, of course, not making any mistakes. And any step along the way where a mistake is made can destroy all the effort up to that point.
How different is what is being done in Argentina right now and what you're doing in California as well?
Things have come very close, in fact. It's a fascinating how fast the area has matured and come almost side by side. Of course, California has probably the advantages that California has, at least in terms of plantings, more diverse plantings and so on, with more technology, more understanding. But Argentina is coming on very quickly in that regard.
When you see, we were talking about upstate New York and the Finger Lakes region right now, and now you have winemaking in Long Island and up and down the Shawangunk chain here and the Catskill Mountains. It seems like there are more places now where they're growing the grapes and winemaking is underway. Does that surprise you at all, or does it frustrate you? There's more competition out there. What do you think about that?
I love it. I really love it. I mean, it does surprise me a little that people will go against all odds to try to grow grapes and make wine. But on the other hand, I think that kind of passion that comes from growing grapes and making your own product is fabulous. And I think it's helping to expand the knowledge. We're doing it in Argentina. People are growing grapes in places like Colorado, which you would never expect. Maybe even Alaska has some grapes. As far as I've heard, all 50 states have some small production at some point or other. They have something going on. I think it's fabulous that they're doing it.
When do you know that you've got that the 2004 or whatever is going to be superb? It's legendary how some people will crave that one year. It just, the wine rankings are superb, and that's it. How early on in the process do you know? Can you sense very early on?
Not always. However, it is possible. Let's talk about 2007, this coming vintage. This year, we're already looking, of course, it's not in the bag yet, but we're looking at a great growing season. So the potential for this season, we know a lot because of the way the vine is maturing its fruit, the size of the clusters, the berries, the looseness of the cluster. Those are all key factors. And then when we can taste and see and sense that there's a lot of quality right now, of course, it isn't, until it's in the barn door, it really basically is not, it's impossible to say.
Let's take a break right now because I want to pick it up when it gets in the barn door and see how things can change at that point. Paul Hobbs is our guest. We'll be right back in a moment. Don't go away.